Chapter 38. A Grand Reunion of the Dubiously Deceased. The Tall and his entourage took refuge in the same caves that the sibilants had laid claim to. Those sibilants were now beyond repentant, prostrating themselves in his presence and professing their unworthiness to even grovel at his feet. Normally he would not accept such hyperbolic adoration, but considering what these people had done, all the lives they had ended, groveling was a far milder punishment than they deserved. Of course, the Thunderhead reminded him that punishment was not its weight. Correction must be about lifting one up from one's poor choices and prior deeds, as long as remorse is sincere, and one is willing to make recompense. There is no purpose to suffering. Still, Grayson didn't mind seeing them face down in bad guano. The repentant Tonys decorated the grotto as lavishly as they could for him with tapestries and pillows and begged for ways to be of service. This place is as good as any to wait, the Thunderhead told Grayson. Good as any? Grayson said. I realize you have no sense of smell, but the stink is terrible in here. My chemical sensors are far more accurate than the human sense of smell, the Thunderhead reminded him. And the ammonia exuded by bad droppings is well within human tolerance. You said wait. What is it we're waiting for? Grayson asked. A visitor, was all the Thunderhead said. Can you at least tell me who it is? Grayson asked. No, I cannot. This is how Grayson knew that he would be visited by a scythe. But considering the increased hostility toward Tonist, why would the Thunderhead welcome such a visit? Maybe the Subsequer and Scythom had found their hiding place and was seeking justice from the sibilants. But if so, why wouldn't the Thunderhead strongly suggest a journey, as it had backed at the cloisters when Scythe Morrison was the enemy? No amount of tossing and turning that night could jock loose a hint of who it might be. Rest easy, the Thunderhead told him gently in the darkness. I am here, and no harm will come to you. Scythe Anastasia had her doubts about this so-called holy man. She needed evidence that the Thunderhead spoke to him. Not just testimony, but actual, irrefutable evidence. Even as a young girl, Citra needed to see something to believe it. This Toll was most likely a charismatic schemer. A con artist taking advantage of the gullible, telling them what they wanted to hear, being who they wanted him to be for his own selfish ends. She wanted to believe that. It was less disturbing than the idea of the Thunderhead choosing a Tonist as its liaison to humanity. It did make sense that the Thunderhead would keep one point of connection with humankind. But why a Tonist? Since the Thunderhead did not make mistakes, it must have had a good reason. But for now, she preferred to believe that Toll was a fraud. Their destination was an inhospitable Sub-Saharan forest, a dense and relenting snarl of trees and wicked, thorny undergrowth that snagged Anastasia's new robe and pricked her through the fabric, leaving her itchy as they made their way to the cave where the Toll was sequestered. As they finally neared the cave, they were accosted by Tonist standing guard. Do not resist, said Pozuelo, but letting her guard down was not easy for Anastasia, knowing who these people were. The Tonists were unarmed, but their grips were firm. Anastasia scanned their faces. Was this the one who had thrown Tenkamen into the ground? Was that the one who had called Scythe Baban to the pyre? She could swear their faces were familiar, but it could have been her imagination. Pozuelo had insisted that they leave their weapons behind. Now she realized it wasn't just to keep them from being confiscated, but also to stop Anastasia from giving in to her rage. Every part of her wanted to exact retribution, but she fought it. She had to keep reminding herself that true Scythes, honorable Scythes, never gleamed in anger. But if a single one of them raised a weapon, She would let loose using her most deadly vocator moves on them, breaking necks and spines without mercy. "We request an audience with it all," Pozuelo said. Anastasia was about to point out that this sect was tongueless, but to her surprise, one of the Tonys responded.
"The doll was elevated to higher octave 2 years ago,"
one of the Tonys responded.
"He is with us now only in harmony."
Pozuelo was not deterred.
"We have heard otherwise,"
he said, then added,
"We are not here to cling him. We are here for our mutual benefit."
The Tonys studied them a few moments longer, serious faces, dripping distrust. Then the one who first spoke said,
"Come with us. I has been expecting you."
Anastasia found that annoying on too many levels to count. If he was expecting them, then why did the Tonys deny he was here? And was he truly expecting them? Or did this lackey just say that to make the doll seem mysterious and all-knowing? Before even meeting him, she already detested this man behind the curtain. The Tonys led them forward, and although Anastasia didn't pull away from their grip, she gave them the opportunity to reconsider it.
"You'd best let go of me if you want to keep your hands."
The Tonys did not ease their grip in the least.
"My hands will grow back like our tongues,"
one of them said.
"The doll, in his wisdom, has given us back our nanites." "Good for him,"
Anastasia said.
"At least he's not a complete imbecile."
Pozuelo gave her a warning glare, and Anastasia decided silence would be the best policy, because nothing out of her mouth right now would benefit the situation. The procession halted at the entrance to the cave, a gaping triangular maw. It was here where they would be presented to the doll. But even before the doll arrived, the first person out of the cave made it abundantly clear to Anastasia that this ride was definitely going to be worth the price of admission. When Scythe Morrison heard that an eulogy of Scythe's was at the cave entrance, he was convinced that the North American Scythedom had finally come for him. Goddard must have known he was alive, must have known what he'd been up to these past few years, and had sent this team to bring him in. He considered running, but there was only one exit from the cave. Besides, he wasn't the same man he had been when he first began this service to the doll. That junior Scythe would save himself at the expense of all others, but this Scythe Morrison would face his capture bravely, defending the doll to the last, as he had promised to do. He stepped out first, as he always did, to assess the threat level and be generally intimidating, but he stopped short at the cave entrance when he saw a familiar turquoise robe, a robe he thought he'd never lay eyes on again. Scythe Anastasia was equally dumbfounded.
"You?"
she said.
"No,"
Morrison blurted.
Not me. I mean, yes, it's me, but I'm not at all. I mean..."
Any hope of strong, silent intimidation was gone. Now he was little more than a stammering imbecile, which is how he always felt around Anastasia.
"What are you even doing here?"
she asked. He started to explain, but realized it was way too long a story for the moment, and besides, he was sure her story was a better one. The other Scythe in her entourage, a Mersonian by the look of his robe, chimed in, several beats behind the curve.
"You mean to say you two know each other?"
But before either of them could answer, Mendoza came up behind Morrison, tapping him on the shoulder.
"As usual, you're in the way, Morrison,"
he grumbled, having completely missed the conversation. Morrison stepped aside and allowed the curate to exit. And the moment Mendoza saw Anastasia, he became just as befuddled as Morrison. Although his eyes darted wildly, he managed to hold his silence. Now they stood on either side of the entrance to the cave in their usual formation. Then the doll emerged from the cave between them. He stopped short, just as Morrison and Mendoza had, gaping in a way that a holy man probably never should.
"Okay,"
said Scythe Anastasia.
"Now I know I've lost my mind."
Grison knew that the Thunderhead must have been enjoying this moment immensely. He could see its cameras wiring on the nearby trees, taking in everyone's expressions, swiveling back and forth to see this absurd little tableau from every angle.
It could have given him at least an inkling that he'd been seeing not only someone he knew, but the very individual who, in a way, was responsible for the strange path his life had taken. It couldn't have told him directly, of course, but it could have given him hints and let him deduce it for himself. But then, even with 1,000 clues, he would have marched into this encounter clueless. He resolved not to give the Thunderhead the satisfaction of seeing him bug-eyed and slack-jawed. So when Anastasia suggested that she may have just lost her mind, he said, as nonchalantly as he could, "Endura rises, I'll rejoice." "Endura didn't rise," she said. "Just me." He held his formal expression for a moment more, but couldn't maintain it. He began to grin. "So you really are alive? I wasn't sure if those broadcasts were real." "And you two know each other as well?" said the Amazonian scythe. "In a previous life," said Anastasia. And then one of her other travel companions began to laugh. "What? Isn't it rich? An reunion of the obviously deceased." Grayson's attention lingered. There was something engaging about her. Or him. Mendoza, trying to regain some decorum, cleared his throat, puffed up a bit, and spoke in his best stage voice. "His sonority, the toll, welcomes you all and grants you an audience," he declared. "A private audience," Grayson quietly prompted. "A private audience," boomed Mendoza, but he made no move to leave. "Meaning," said Grayson, "just between Scythe Anastasia and me." Mendoza turned to him, his eyes panicked. "I don't think that's wise. At least take Morrison with you for protection." But Morrison put up his hand in instant surrender. "Leave me out of this," he said. "I'm not going up against Scythe Anastasia." The Thunderhead's cameras wired, and Grayson could swear it sounded like electronic laughter. "Take the other scene," Grayson said, "and get them something to eat. They must be starving." He turned to the Tonists around them, who had witnessed this odd but momentous reunion. "All is well," he told them, then gestured to Anastasia. "Well with me." And the two of them stepped off together into the woods. "Well with me?" said Anastasia when they were out of earshot. "Really? Could you be any more pretentious?" "It's part of the act," Grayson told her. "So you admit it's an act?" "The prophet part is, but it's true that I'm not unsavory, and the Thunderhead really does speak to me." He gave her a wry grin. "Maybe it's my reward for saving your life that day and letting you hit me with your car." "It wasn't my car," Anastasia pointed out. "It was Scythe Curie's. I was just learning how to drive it." "And a good thing, too. If you had been a better driver and had missed me, we'd all have been incinerated," he pointed out. "So, does this mean that Scythe Curie is still alive, too?" Anastasia's heart sank at having to speak the truth aloud. She doubted it would ever be easier. "Marie died making sure I could eventually be revived." "Revived?" said Grayson. "That explains why you don't look a day older than you did 3 years ago." She took a long look at him. He did look different, and it wasn't just the outfit. His jaw seemed a little harder, his gait more confident, and his gaze so direct as to be invasive. He had learned to play this role well, just as she had learned to play hers. "The last I heard, you refused the offer of sanctuary I arranged you for in Amazonia. So instead, you stayed with the Tonists?" His gaze became even more intrusive. Not judgmental, but possessing a deeper side, a bit like the Thunderhead itself. "Hiding out with the Tonists was your suggestion, or did you forget that?" "No, I remember," she told him. "But I never thought you'd stay. I never thought you'd become their prophet." She looked over his vestments. "I can't decide whether you look ridiculous or regal." "Both," he told her. "The trick is convincing people that strange clothing makes you something more than ordinary. But you know all about that, don't you?" Anastasia had to admit he was right. The world treated you differently, defined you differently, when you wore robes or regalia. "Just as long as you don't believe it yourself," she told him. When I take all this off, I'm still Grayson Tolliver, he said. And when I slip out of this rope, I'm still Citra Terranova.
He smiled broadly at that.
I never knew your given name until now, Citra. I like it.
Hearing him say her name gave her a sudden wash of nostalgia. A yearning for a time before all this.
There aren't many people who call me that anymore.
He looked at her wistfully.
Funny, but it was never easy for me to talk to you before. Now it's easier than talking with anyone else. I think we've become alike in a lot of ways.
She laughed at that.
Not because it was funny,
but because it was true. The rest of the world saw them both as symbols, intangible light to guide them in the darkness. She understood now why ancient peoples turned their heroes into constellations.
You haven't told me why you wanted an audience with it all. Saif Pozuelo thinks you know a safe place where Goddard won't find us,
Anastasia said.
Well, if the Thunderhead knows of a place like that, it hasn't told me. But then there's a lot of things it doesn't tell me.
It's alright, said Anastasia.
Pozuelo just wants to protect me, but I don't want to hide.
What do you want? Grayson asked. What did she want? Said that Terranova wanted to shed her rope, seek out her family, and argue with her brother about unimportant things. But sighed Anastasia wouldn't have any of that.
I want to bring down Goddard, she said. I've been able to place him on Mars at the time of the disaster, but being there doesn't prove he caused it.
He survived Mars, and he survived Endura, said Grayson.
Suspicious, but not incriminating. Exactly, which is why there's someone else I need to find,
Anastasia said.
Have you ever heard of Saith Alighieri?
Pozuelo had to leave them that afternoon. He was called back to Masonia, but his high blade.
Tarsila gives me lots of leeway, especially when my salvage venture brought forth you,
he told Anastasia.
But when word got out that I had brought our artist friend to Sub-Sahara, she demanded my return, lest we be accused of conspiring with Tonists.
He sighed.
We are very tolerant region, but after the attack of Tenkamenin's police, even the most accepting regions are cooling to Tonists, and our Highblade doesn't want bad publicity.
Several Tonists burst in the cover behind them. They both, reverently saying, "Your nurse," some of their voices still a little slurred, as it was the first week with their new tongues. It was hard to believe that these were the same violent, crazed civilians who had murdered Tenkamenin. Grayson, the Tall, that is, had turned them and brought them back from that awful edge of their own humanity. Anastasia could not forgive them, but she found an ability to coexist with them.
People are vessels,
Yuri had said to her.
They hold whatever's poured into them.
And apparently, Grayson had drained them and refilled them with something far more palatable. Pozuelo said his goodbye at the entrance to the cave.
This place is isolated, and if the tall troll is under the protection of the Thunderhead, you'll be safe with him, he told her. It's not exactly the sanctuary I was looking for, but who knows if that place even exists. Rumors aren't worth the air they're whispered on. I'm hoping that all will help me find Alighieri. I doubt he even exists anymore, Pozuelo lamented. He was ancient when I was an apprentice, and I am, as you say, no spring chicken.
He laughed and embraced her.
It felt comforting,
fatherly. Until she was in his embrace, she hadn't realized how much she missed it. It made her think of her family once more. She had not tried to contact them since her revival, as Pozuelo had advised her against it. They were safe and protected in a friendly region, he had assured her. Perhaps there would come a time for that reunion. Or perhaps she'd never see them again. Either way, there was still too much to be done for her to even think about it.
Say goodbye to Captain Soberanis for me, Pozuelo said. I take it Yuriko's staying on.
As you ordered, Anastasia said. Pozuelo raised an eyebrow.
I never gave such an order, he said. Yuriko does as Yuriko pleases. That the good captain has forsaken the sea and has chosen to be your protector says a lot about both of you.
He embraced her one final time.
Take care, me wanyo.
Then he turned and strode toward his transport that waited in a clearing. Ezra, the artist, who Pozuelo saw fit to set free, took to painting a mural to fill one of the larger caverns. It tickled him that this could become a pilgrimage destination for future Tonists, if indeed there would be any future Tonists, and that these cave paintings might be endlessly analyzed by scholars of tomorrow. He introduced some odd element just to confuse them. A dancing bear, a 5-eyed boy, and an 11-hour clock missing the number 4. What's life if you can mess with the future? He said. He asked the doll if he remembered him, and Grayson told him that he did. It was half a truth. Grayson remembered Ezra's audience with him because it had been a turning point for Grayson as well. The first time he gave advice rather than just being a mouthpiece for the Thunderhead. But he had no memory at all of Ezra's face. The wonderful limitations of the biological brain, the Thunderhead said wistfully. The remarkable ability to dispense with the unnecessary, rather than filing every little thing into a cumbersome compendium. The Thunderhead called humanity's selective memory the gift of forgetting. There were many things Grayson had forgotten that he wished he could remember. Most of his childhood, any warm moments with his parents. And there were things he remembered that he wished he could forget. Like the look on Purity's face when Scythe Constantine gleaned her. He knew the gift of forgetting was now a bane to Anastasia, because the world seems to have forgotten Scythe Alighieri. But the Thunderhead hadn't. Alighieri was there in its cumbersome compendium of human history. Getting to that information was the problem. The Thunderhead had been silent for his entire conversation with Anastasia. Then, after she had retired to the cave to join her comrades, it finally spoke. I cannot, in any way, help Anastasia find the man she's looking for. But you do know where he can be found, don't you? I do, but it would be a violation for me to communicate his location to her. Can you tell me? I could, said the Thunderhead, but if you then tell her, I will be forced to mark you unsavory, and then where would we be? Grayson sighed. There must be a workaround. Perhaps, said the Thunderhead, but I can't help you find it. Workarounds? The Thunderhead had used him as one back when he was a naive Nimbus Academy student, and come to think of it, he remembered learning about an official workaround in one of his early classes at the academy before he got himself expelled. There was a sort of ritualistic practice that allowed a Nimbus agent to speak with a scythe without breaking the law. A trialogue, it was called. It involved a professional go-between who was well versed in scythe state protocols, what could and could not be said. What they needed, Grayson realized, was a go-between. In his private cavern spread with rugs and hung with tapestries, the doll sat on one of the many pillows strewn about the space, facing Jericho Soberanis. Grayson estimated he and Soberanis were roughly the same age. That is unless the salvage captain had turned a corner, but Grayson didn't think so. The young captain didn't seem to be the type who would set back so far. Still, there was something noble there. Not so much wisdom, but worldliness. Grayson had been all over the world, yet saw so little of it in his protective cocoon. He felt like he'd been nowhere at all. But Jericho Soberanis had truly seen the world, and what was more, knew the world. It was something to be admired. Scythe Anastasia explained why you called for me, Soberanis said. How will this work? What is it they call you? Your sonority, Grayson said. That's right, your serenity, Soberanis said with a smirk. You think it's funny? The smirk didn't leave the salvage captain's face. Did you come up with that? No, my chief curate did. He ought to be in advertising. He was. The conversation lagged. Not surprising, this was entirely artificial and forced, but it needed to happen. Say something, Grayson told the salvage captain. What sort of things should I say? It doesn't matter what you talk about, we just need to have a conversation. Then I'll pose questions to the Thunderhead about the conversation.
And and it will answer. Jericho smiled again, mischievous, alluring in an odd sort of way. A game of chess, then, where all the pieces are invisible. If you like, said Grison. Very well. Jericho took a moment to consider the subject's matter, then said something Grison was not expecting. You and I have something in common. What would that be? We both sacrificed our lives to save Seth Anastasia. Grayson shrugged. It was only temporary. Still, said Soberanis, it takes courage and a remarkable leap of faith to do so. Not really. People splat every day. Yes, but neither of us are that sort. To render ourselves, that is, goes against our basic natures. Not everyone would have made the choice we've made. This is how I know that you are much more than that outfit you wear. Sobrani smiled again. This time it was genuine, honest. Grayson had never met someone with such a wide variety of smiles. Each one spoke volumes. Thank you, said Grayson. I suppose our mutual admiration of Scythe and Anastasia does bond us in a way. He waited to see if the Thunderhead would say anything at all, but it didn't. It was waiting to be asked. Grayson still didn't know what to ask it. I hope this isn't insulting, Grayson said, but I'm not sure how I should address you, as Mr. or Mrs. Soberanis. The salvage captain glanced around the cavern and became noticeably uncomfortable. I'm a bit at a loss. I very rarely find myself in a place where I can't see the sky. Why should that matter? I suppose it shouldn't. I am always out of doors, or intentionally near a window or skylight, but here in a cave. Grayson still didn't understand, and the captain became just the tiniest bit miffed. I will never understand how you binaries are so attached to your birth plumbing. Why should it matter whether a person has ovaries, or testicles, or both? It doesn't, Grayson said, feeling a little flustered. I mean, it does matter for some things, doesn't it? You tell me. Grayson found he couldn't look away from that gaze. Maybe it doesn't matter as much as I thought. He hadn't meant to pose it as a question, but it made no difference, because Jericho was not giving him an answer. Why don't you just call me Yuri, and we don't have to worry about technicalities? Alright, Yuritis, let's begin. I thought we already had. Is it my move? Yuri feigned moving an imaginary chess piece forward, then said, I very much like your eyes. I see how they can persuade people to follow you. I don't think my eyes have anything to do with that. You'd be surprised. Grayson pressed his earpiece deeper in his ear. Thunderhead, do my eyes influence people to follow me? Yes, on occasion, the Thunderhead responded. They can be helpful when all else fails. Grayson found himself blushing in spite of himself. Jerry read it and offered a new variation on that grin. So, the Thunderhead agrees with me? Maybe. Grayson had entered this whole thing assuming he would be in control of the conversation, but clearly he was not. And yet he was beginning to grin as well. He was sure, though, that he only had one grin, and that it looked profoundly stupid. Tell me about Madagascar, he asked, shifting the focus away from himself. Jerry's demeanor immediately changed with thoughts of home. My region is beautiful. The mountains, the beaches, the forests. The people are kind, gentle, and accepting. You should see Antananarivo, our capital city, and the way the sun hits the hills at sunset. Thunderhead, said Grayson, tell me something interesting about Antananarivo. The Thunderhead spoke, and Grayson listened. What did it say? Jerry asked. It told me that the tallest building in Antananarivo is 309.67 meters high, and it's exactly the same height as 4 other buildings in the world, down to the millimeter. Yuri leaned back unimpressed. Is that the most interesting fact it could find? What about the jacaranda trees around Lake Kaunosi, or the royal tombs? But Grayson put up his hand to stop Yuri, and thought for a moment. The Thunder had never said anything without a reason. The trick was to read its mind. Thunderhead, where are those other 4 buildings? I'm curious. One is in the Chilargentine region, it told him, another in Britannia, the third in Israevia, and the fourth in the region of New Zealand. Grayson told Jory, who was still unimpressed. I've been to all those regions, but home is always the best, I suppose. Have you been to every region in the world? Grayson asked. All the ones with a ghost, Jerry said. I have an aversion to landlocked places. And then the Thunderhead offered a simple and obvious opinion, which Grayson shared. The Thunderhead says you'd probably be most at home in regions that feature an island or archipelago roughly the size of Madagascar. Grayson turned his head a bit. A habit he had when he was speaking to the Thunderhead in the presence of others. Thunderhead, what regions might that be? But the Thunderhead was silent. Grayson grinned. Nothing, which means we're onto something. The ones I can think of off the top of my head, said Yuri, are Britannia, Caribbean, the region of the rising sun, New Zealand, and the Nisius. Interesting, said Grayson. What? Britannia and New Zealand have come up twice. To that, the Thunderhead was, once more, silent. I'm beginning to like this game, said Yuri. Grayson couldn't deny that he was, though. What region would you like to live in? Yuri asked. If you had your choice of any in the world. It was a loaded question, and perhaps Yuri knew that, because everyone else in the world did have that choice. Anyone could live anywhere, but for Grayson it was less of an actual place than a state of mind. I'd want to live in a place where nobody knows me, he told Yuri. But nobody does know you, Yuri said. They know that all, but not you. Take me, for instance. I don't even know your name. It's Grayson. Yuri smiled with the warmth of the Madagascan sun. Hello, Grayson. That simple greeting seemed to both melt him and freeze him at once. Madagascans were known to be charming. Perhaps that's all it was. Or perhaps not. He realized he'd have to unpack it later. For me, I never want to be far from the sea, Jerry said. Thunderhead, said Grayson, what are your thoughts on that? And the Thunderhead said, there is a city or town in every region that is the farthest from the sea. I assume the captain would not care to live in any of those places. But, said Grayson, if they had jacaranda trees like that Madagascan lake, maybe Jerry might feel at home. Perhaps, said the Thunderhead. And then Grayson made a stealth move. The kind of move one's opponent wouldn't see coming. But of course the Thunderhead did. In fact, the Thunderhead welcomed it. Tell me, Thunderhead, what are some of the regions where jacarandas grow? Although they do best in warmer climates, they grow in almost every region now, the Thunderhead told him. Their purple blooms are appreciated around the world. Yes, said Grayson, but can you give me a list of, 4 places where they can be found? Of course, Grayson. Jacaranda trees can be found in West America, Isthmus, Lower Himalaya, and even in the botanical gardens of Britannia. Jerry studied him. What is it? What did the Thunderhead say? Check and mate, Grayson said, and gave Jerry his stupid grin. We're looking for a town in the Britannia region that's farthest from the sea. That's where we'll find Saith Ali Jerry, Grayson told Anastasia. Are you sure? Positive, said Grayson. Probably, he corrected. Maybe. Anastasia considered it, but then returned her gaze to Grayson. You said we. Grayson nodded. I'm going with you. It was the most spontaneous decision Grayson had made in years. It felt good. More than good. It felt freeing. Grayson, I'm not sure that's a good idea, Anastasia said, but he would not be deterred. I'm the Toll, and the Toll goes where he pleases, Grayson said. Besides, I want to be there when Scythe Anastasia changes the world,
The Thunderhead said nothing either way. It didn't influence him against it. It didn't suggest that it was the right thing to do. Or perhaps it wasn't commenting because it involved that scythe. It was only when Grison was alone again that the Thunderhead spoke to him. It wasn't about their destination, however. The conversation took an entirely different direction. I sensed that change in your physiology as you spoke to the salvage captain, the Thunderhead said. Why is that your business? Grayson snapped. It was just an observation, the Thunderhead said calmly. With all your years of studying human nature, don't you know when you're intruding into my privacy? I do know, said the Thunderhead, and I also know when you want that privacy intruded upon. As always, the Thunderhead was right, and it ticked Grison off. He wanted to talk about it, to process it, but of course there was no one he could talk to but the Thunderhead. I believe she had an effect on you, it said. See? Isn't it presumptuous of you to call Yuri see? Not at all. The sky above the cave is clear and full of stars. Then the Thunderhead explained to Grison how Yuri saw yonder, a thing as bright as the wind and ephemeral as clouds. That's poetic, said Grison, but impractical. Who are we to judge such things? The Thunderhead said. And besides, the human heart is rarely practical. No, that sounds judgmental. Quite the opposite, said the Thunderhead. I long for the luxury of being impractical. It would add texture to my existence. It was only later, after Grison had taken his earpiece out and he was lying in bed, that it occurred to him why his conversation with Yuri Soberanis felt so inviting and unsettling at the same time. Hello, Grison, Yuri had said. Nothing strange about that, except that it echoed something deeper. They were the same words, the same tone of voice. The Thunderhead had used the moment it began speaking to him again. The Mars colony was reduced to a radioactive crater long before I was born, but for those of you who are pushing 100, you'll probably remember the public outrage. After the moon and then Mars, people felt that colonization was just too dangerous. People turned against the idea of world solutions, or should I say were turned against it by some very loud and opinionated news feeds. The biggest being One Glove Media. Ever heard of it? No? That's because it doesn't exist anymore. It was there for one reason and one reason only. To sway public opinion, so that the Thunderhead's decision to stop all space colonization efforts would appear to be a response to public outcry. Another response to repeated scythe attacks on those efforts. And, to add insult to injury, one of the key scythes responsible was rapidly rising in the ranks of the American Scythedom. Even the patron historic he had chosen was a secret snub. Dr. Robert Goddard, the rocket scientist who made spaceflight possible. But the Thunderhead wasn't done yet. It was determined to try one final time to establish an off-world presence. Not a lunar or planetary colony, but an orbital one, closer to home, easier to directly oversee. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to guess what happened next.